We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining. It's always nice to see the attendees join these various webinars and ask a Fluxxpert. This is Sean here with Flux as always, and today we're going to be going over the second of our permissions webinar, but more on the tips and tricks aspect of it. We'll be going over some interesting configurations and things to look out for when configuring permissions in the admin panel. And much like our Permissions 101 webinar, this session is going to be directed towards users with admin privileges. So if you do not have access to the admin panel, please contact your admin to gain access if your role within the foundation allows for this. After the overview, we will be having a question and answer session with a couple of our Fluxxperts on permissions. And today we have our returning guest, Dane, who is our QA engineer, as well as Kevin, who is a great customer success manager. If you should have any questions during this session, and we really do mean at any time, please throw them into the chat section. So as always, before we get started with the overview, let's all get familiar with where the chat function lives. So at the bottom of your screens, you should see the chat button. Go ahead and click it. And when it pulls up the window, what I'd like you to do is enter how long you've been using Flux. All right. So myself, personally, I've been working closely with the platform for just about a year now. Oh, wow. We have a 3-year, 8 years. Hey, I see you, Aaron. 2 years. Oh, we have a brand newbie here, Vanessa, 3 months. Well, welcome. Welcome. I'm glad to see you are joining this, as well as some of our more tenured guests here. So that's great. All right. So now that we all know where and how to use the chat function, please use it throughout the webinar. So we're going to go ahead and get started and get into the overview portion of today's webinar. So in this webinar, we'll be looking into roles versus permissions, and then we're going to talk about super users. And then we're going to go over a fan favorite trick, building a view-only profile and assigning a dashboard to limit what these profiles sees. And of course, our Fluxxperts will be available at the end of the overview to answer any questions. So we're going to get started with talking through roles versus permissions. Now, roles and permissions are not the same thing. However, they do work in conjunction with each other. We know that permissions are what the user is allowed to do. Roles, however, control when the user is allowed to use those permissions. As you can see here, you assign a role to the user on their user record. This role correlates directly with an allowed role you configure on a workflow button. Now, when a user's role is allowed on a specific workflow button, they'll have the workflow button available to them. Only when the workflow button is available to the user will they be able to edit the record. This is important to remember. We often receive some support tickets from admins who believe that there are permission issues when a user is unable to edit a record. Always note that a user isn't able to carry out any edits unless they have workflow capabilities. So we're going to get into now what a super user can do. First and foremost, you may need to set up a super user profile in the admin panel. To do so, you're going to go to the user settings and then profiles, and then you're going to click create or click new profile. And then on the right-hand side in its attributes, you're going to select super user and employee as the categories. Now, you may be asking, what can a super user do? Well, the easy way to explain it is that super users are allowed front-end admin privileges. They will be able to create ad hoc reports, as you can see here. Super users also supersede any role-based permission sets and allowed roles and workflows. As for what they cannot do, one is they cannot access the admin panel. This is reserved for full admins only. The second is they cannot impersonate users in the system. Again, this is reserved for full admins only. One final thing to note is that you can give a super user profile without needing to update your visibility settings, as super users supersede workflow restrictions. Now we're going to go over an interesting use case when it comes to profiles and their permissions. A view-only profile. This is commonly used for external auditors that need to be able to access and view data, but should not be allowed to alter or edit any records. Now, by a show of, I guess, chat responses, because I can't see your hands, but how many of you have either built something similar or needed this at one point in time? So let's see what your use cases are for the auditor or view-only profile in the chat. Yeah, this has been built out before. That's good. Well, I'll take it by the sound of silence in the chat box that this may not be something that many people have used. Oh, well, there is an example. Great. There is a view-only profile. Fantastic. So we're going to get into configuring the view-only profile, and it's pretty simple, but it will require some careful attention to what is allowed. When creating a new profile, what you want to do is add the list all and view all permissions. This will allow the user to see the data inside the Flux system, but would not allow them to edit any records. You can play with the different combinations if you would like your auditors to do a bit more than just view data, but this is what you'll need to make a true view-only profile. Another useful trick for view-only profiles is controlling their dashboards. When giving external users access to your system, you may want to limit what the user is able to access. You can do so by first creating a locked dashboard and then saving it as a dashboard template. Then you're going to go back into the admin panel, go into the user settings, and then select this view-only profile. And on the right-hand side in its attributes, you're going to select the template of that dashboard you created, as indicated here. You should see the word locked next to it. This would make it so the user is only able to view the data in the cards you configured for them. They will not be able to add or remove cards to the dashboard. You can even go further and lock the cards that you filtered for them as well, so they aren't able to change the filters. However, at this point, the view-only profile would still be able to create a new dashboard and add new cards to that. Using this checkbox will prevent users from adding or removing dashboards. Now, I really hope you guys appreciate the creative name we've chosen for this checkbox. All right, now that you've controlled what cards the user can see by locking the dashboard, and you've removed their ability to create the new dashboard, that's it. I mean, this view-only profile can now only see exactly what you want them to see. Now, here's what that user sees when trying to add a card to a locked dashboard. As you can see from the Add Card menu, all of the links to open a new card are not clickable and will not open a new card. Here's what they'll see if they try to add it, try to create a new dashboard. As you can see, the edit and the new buttons are not available. The user will have to use this specific dashboard when they're accessing Flux. Hey, Sean Snow for the kids. All right, so that's pretty much going to wrap it up for the overview portion of today's webinar. So we're going to pivot into the Q&A session with our Fluxxperts. So again, today we have Dane and Kevin on our panel. Dane, if you don't mind, for all our newcomers, want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I've been here at Flux for 4 years.
Hey.
Not part of the grant making world, but I picked it up pretty quick, I'd say.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Dane. All right, and on to Kevin. Kevin, why don't you share a little bit about yourself?
Hey guys, I'm sure you're all tired of me by now. I've been with Flux for about 3 years. First year as a CSM though, so hi.
Hey. All right, great. Yeah, we got a lot of depth of experience and insight here with the pair that we have here. So now we're going to get into some of the questions that you may have around permissions, tips and tricks and such. So as you have them, go ahead and submit them into the chat. But we did receive some questions ahead of time that were submitted to our CSMs. So we're going to get into those first. And then any questions that you have, we'll move on into those. So first off, let's take a look at some questions. The first question is, I have a grantee that is marked as grantee all programs. However, they do not seem to have access to any edit or workflow buttons. What's the deal with that? Or maybe, what's the deal with that?
So 3 things here that you would want to check. The first one would be permissions. You want to make sure that they have the update permission on that specific model. The next one is to make sure that the specific program would work for that grantee, but since they have all programs, that would lead me to believe that that potential program selected for the request, if it's on the request, doesn't actually roll up to the all programs. And the other one would be the grantee role isn't selected for that particular workflow. So those are the 3 things that I would look for that would block the user from the edit buttons or the workflow buttons.
Yeah, those are great tips and a great question. That's something kind of common that we see. And, you know, with Dane's tips there, like if other grantees have the ability to edit and workflow buttons, but this one particular one does not, you may want to take a look at the program that's on that particular request, because that's usually where we see the miss is it doesn't roll up to all programs, but you've identified them to be part of all programs. So you can either adjust their user card to meet that specific program, or go into the programs of your admin panel and have that particular program roll up to all programs. Thank you very much. All right, so another question we have is, would super users be allowed to give admin rights to other users? Kevin, can you help us answer that one?
I'm going to give you a very long-winded response for this.
Wait for it.
No. No. So you'll notice that super users, as much as they do get, well, we say they do have like front-end admin capabilities, there's still a few things that they aren't able to do. So they can't give admin rights to other users. That kind of defeat the purpose. But they would also not be able to impersonate other users. So there's just the 2 limitations on the front end there for them.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and great clarification. It seems counterintuitive to give someone, you know, limited admin access and then they start opening the doors to the kingdom to everybody else, right? So you want that control as a full admin. So great. All right, and another question that we have here is, what is the difference of adding the super user category to an employee profile versus creating a separate profile? So we kind of touched upon, you know, when we created that super user profile in a few earlier slides, but this is a great question to help clarify the difference of just adding that category to an existing profile. So Dane, if you don't mind, can you help us expand on that?
Sure. So when you add the super user category to an existing employee profile, you are essentially giving all your existing employees the super user ability.
Whoa.
So you don't really want to do that. You want to kind of use super user sparsely or for a select set of users. So when you create your separate profile, which is what we recommend, and what we do internally, is to create that super user profile, assign them the employee category and the super user category. That way we can control who's a super user and who's not, instead of just opening up the entire system.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great tip because, yeah, I think I've dealt with a support ticket in the past. I'm not going to say who it was because I don't honestly remember at this point, but yeah, no, they added super user to the employee profile and just were concerned that all of a sudden they were able to do all these admin front end things that they didn't want them to do. So great clarification. Thank you for that. So now would be a great time. You have us all available at your disposal. You can pull from all our various knowledge and experiences and ask those looming questions that you've had about permissions, the tips and tricks. What would you like to do with your permissions, but you haven't figured it out? Or, what's a challenge that you're having? We're here for you. So please do provide some questions here. I mean, I know everybody knows how to use the chat. I've seen it already. Well, if there are no questions, we will go ahead and get close to wrapping this up here. All right. Well then, this was a short and sweet one. Really want to thank everybody for participating. Let's just recap what we went over today. We went over the roles versus permissions, how they kind of work in unison with each other, but are different. We went over the super users, some tips and tricks on building out a good super user profile for that. And then we went into view-only profiles, which some people have used in the past, but may be a new thing for some of the other clients. And then we talked about assigning dashboards, especially for that view-only profile. A great tip to really control what they can interact with. So, as always, this webinar will be available that you can share with your peers if no one had a chance to join us today, and that can be accessed through our knowledge base at flux.zendesk.com. You can also take a look at our community site and under training, where we post various announcements about upcoming trainings. And also there is a link that will allow you to provide some feedback or topics that you would like to have covered. We've gotten some great suggestions of late, and we're working to build out some new webinars based on that feedback. So thank you for those who submitted, and I encourage everybody else to go ahead and let us know what you'd like to hear. And of course, you can always reach out to us here in support, as well as your CSMs, and we're always here and happy to help. So with that, thanks again, everybody who's spent the time to join us today, and I hope you all have an enjoyable, productive rest of your week. Have a great day, guys.